Trump calls himself the president of peace. I want to examine that claim with you today, not to score political points, not to argue that peace is bad, but because I grew up in a country that has had 17 peace agreements. Not one of them lasted, and every single one was announced with the same confidence. By the end of this video, you will understand three things you did not understand before. First, the difference between a peace that is declared and a peace that is actually built, and why one lasts and the other one does not. Second, why the current approach to Iran, to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and to every conflict this administration has claimed as a victory follows the same pattern, and what that pattern produced 30 years from now. Third, why the Constitution gave Congress, and not the President, the power to make decisions about war and peace, and what it costs every single time that requirement is bypassed. Once you can see that difference, you will see it everywhere. In Iran, in the DRC, in the next conflict this administration claims to have resolved before it has even asked what caused the last one. I have seen this before, up close, in my own country, in my own school. Let me show you what I saw. I was a student, the way students are everywhere in the world, sitting in class, talking with friends, thinking about ordinary things. And then something happened that I did not understand at first. There was a truck, and there were people running, and there were things being said, things being shouted, and I watched my classmate Kabeja get taken. Not arrested, not processed by any legal system, taken. I thought at first maybe this is a mistake. Maybe this will be explained. What became clear as I watched was that we were living in a place where there was no law to stop it, where anyone could do anything and nothing would intervene. I've seen something similar here in America. January 6th would be one example. A moment where the normal boundaries dissolved and people did what they wanted because they believed nothing would stop them. But January 6th was brought to an end. The institutions held. People were held accountable. That was not what happened with Kabeja. What I did not understand then, and still do not fully understand now, is how school went on the next day as if nothing had happened. No one addressed it. The school authorities said nothing. There was no acknowledgement of what the students had witnessed. No attempt to calm those who were frightened. Just silence. And that silence taught me something I have carried ever since. Silence is not the absence of conflict. Sometimes silence is how conflict is managed. And managed conflict is not resolved conflict. It is just waiting. I wrote a book about the conflict in Eastern Congo. I called it Kabeja Go Home, because Kabeja's story and the story of every person like him is at the center of a conflict the world has been calling resolved for 30 years. It has never been resolved. It has only been silenced, and then it comes back, and then it is silenced again. I am telling you this because when I heard that Trump administration had announced a peace accord covering the DRC, I felt something specific, not hope. I said, here we go again. But before I tell you about the accords, let me show you what peace actually looks like in my community. Because I have seen it. I know what it feels like. And it looked nothing like a document signed in Washington. Before I tell you what peace is not, let me tell you what I have actually seen peace look like. I grew up in Eastern Congo. In my community, we had Tutsi neighbors, people from a community that has been described in international media as the enemy, as the outsider, as the source of conflict. I drank milk with them. from the Inhongoro, a traditional container shared between neighbors, the way neighbors share things everywhere in the world. They were not my enemy. They were my neighbors, the people whose children I played with, whose food I ate, whose language I heard alongside my own. That is what peace actually looks like. Not a document, not a declaration, not a ceremony with cameras and handshakes and a name. Two communities sharing something as ordinary as milk. Peace is not the absence of difference. The Tutsi community and my community had real differences, real grievances, real history between us that was complicated and painful and unresolved. Peace was not pretending those differences did not exist. Peace was existing alongside them. Choosing the shared cup over the grievance, not because the grievance was not real, but because the neighbor was also real. That kind of peace cannot be announced. It cannot be produced by a document signed in Washington. It cannot be imposed by force or by deal or by the presence of a powerful country that has decided the conflict should be over. It has to be cultivated the way you cultivate anything that grows, slowly, with attention, with care for the roots, not just the surface. You cannot force someone who lost their father or their mother or their son or their daughter to sit across from the person responsible and call it dialogue. That is not dialogue. That is theater. And everyone in the room knows it. Real dialogue has to be cultivated. It takes time. It takes safety. It takes the slow work of community deciding, not being told, that they are willing to try. There is no community in Eastern Congo that can claim complete innocence. Everyone has been hurt, and everyone has hurt someone. That is what 30 years of unresolved conflict produces. You cannot heal that with a press release. The Washington Accord did not do that work. They could not do that work because that work cannot be done in Washington. I want to give you a number, 17. That is the number of major peace agreements signed regarding the conflict in Eastern Congo since 1994. 17 agreements, 17 declarations of peace, 17 moments where the international community announced that the conflict was resolved or on its way to resolution. Every single one of them collapsed. Not because the people signing them were insincere, but because every single one of them treated the symptom instead of the cause. Here is what the cause actually is. The Tutsi community in the Congo, the Banyamulenge, has never been definitively granted or denied Congolese citizenship. That single unresolved legal question has been the oxygen feeding this conflict for 30 years. Rwanda uses it to justify intervention, saying it must protect its ethnic kin across the border. Congolese nationalists use it to justify exclusion, saying that the Tutsi community are Rwandan, not Congolese. Armed groups use it to recruit, telling young men that their community has no future inside Congo's legal framework. Not one of the 17 agreements addressed that question. Not one. Because addressing it is hard. It requires political courage from the Congolese government. It requires Rwanda to accept that its security interests do not override Congo's sovereignty. It requires the international community to stay engaged, not just for the signing ceremony, but for the decade of implementation that follows. It's easier to announce peace than to build it. The Washington Accords are agreement number 18. Let me be specific about what those accords actually contain and what they do not. The DRC government says Rwanda is the bad actor, that Rwanda is violating Congo's sovereignty by deploying its military and supporting the M23 rebel group in the east. Rwanda says the opposite, that the DRC is harboring the FDLR, a Hutu militia with direct roots in the 1994 genocide, and systematically failing to protect the rights of Congolese Tutsi citizens. Both of those claims have documented evidence behind them. Both of those grievances are real. When Washington Accords were signed on December 4th, 2025, which of those claims was resolved? The answer is neither. Rwanda agreed to withdraw its troops, but only after the FDLR is neutralized first. The DRC insists both must happen simultaneously. That disagreement was not resolved before the signing. It was papered over with a ceremony. What about the Tutsi refugees still sitting in camps in Rwanda? People who fled eastern Congo and have not been able to return. Is there a mechanism guaranteeing their security if they go back to their land? Is there a guarantee that the communities they return to will receive them? What about the sentiment held by many Congolese that the Tutsi and Hutu communities are foreigners in their own country? That question does not get resolved by signature. It gets resolved by the slow work of changing what people believe about each other. Work that takes a generation, work that requires schools and communities and leaders willing to say out loud that their neighbors belong here. Was any of that work included in the Accords? 5 days after Trump presided over the signing, actually before the signing, the fighting in the east were already underway around the city of Uvira. And 5 days after Trump's presided over the signing, M23 fighters captured Uvira in clear violation of the accords that had just been signed. Hundreds of thousands of civilians fled. Human Rights Watch assessed the accord 3 months later. Their conclusion? Little more than paper promises. Fighting continuing, civilians bearing the brunt. And there is the political reality inside Tshisekedi's own coalition that makes this even harder. Inside his government, there are hardliners who do not want any dialogue with the rebels, who do not recognize M23 or the Banyamulenge community as legitimate voices at any table, who see the conflict in the East as external aggression to be defeated militarily, not as a domestic political question requiring dialogue. Tshisekedi needs those hardliners to keep his government functioning, which means even if he wanted to do the hard work of community dialogue, the political cost of doing it inside his own coalition may be higher than the political cost of signing an accord that looks like peace without being peace. Now, I want to answer the question the coverage of the Washington Accords almost entirely ignored. Why Washington? This conflict had been the subject of multiple African-led peace processes for years. The Nairobi process, led by the East African Community, the Luanda process, led by Angola, backed by African Union. Regional leaders who knew this conflict, who shared borders with it, who had deployed troops into it. Why did those processes fail? And why did Tshisekedi end up in Washington? Both sides were doing what analysts called forum shopping. That's a secret. Each gravitating toward the mediator they believed would favor their position. Tshisekedi resisted the Nairobi process because he believed Kenya was biased toward Rwanda. Rwanda and M23 resisted the Luanda process because SADC had deployed troops on the DRC side. The African Union tried to merge the two. That effort moved slowly. In December 2024, the Luanda process collapsed. Kagame cancelled a scheduled signing because the DRC refused to commit to dialogue with the M23. Tshisekedi's position was that the conflict was strictly a state-to-state matter between Congo and Rwanda, not an internal Congolese political question. not to sit across from rebels he considered illegitimate. Angola stepped away from mediation entirely after that collapse. And then in February 2025, Tshisekedi sent a letter directly to Trump, offering the United States access to Congo's critical minerals in exchange for security assistance. He did not go to Washington because Washington was the most legitimate venue. He went because he understood something very clearly. An informed mediator asks hard questions. A mediator who wants minerals asks easier ones. The African processes were asking hard questions. They were showing him that his refusal to engage with the legitimate grievances of the communities in the East was an obstacle to peace, not a reasonable position. Washington was asking about cobalt. So Tshisekedi went to Washington. He presented himself as the victim of Rwandan aggression, a claim that contains real truth, while parts of the story that complicate that picture were left at the door. The FDLR, the citizenship question, the hardliners in his own coalition blocking dialogue, the last-minute reversals that had exhausted every African mediator willing to do the hard work. Washington heard the victim narrative. Washington got the mineral deal. Tshisekedi got the security guarantee and the ceremony with Trump. Short term, it looks like a win. He survived politically. He secured American backing. He got the headline. But there is a bigger question, a question that no signing ceremony has ever answered. Will bombs and drones mend hearts? The communities in eastern Congo have been hurt for 30 years. Every community. There's no side with clean hands. There's no family that does not carry a wound that predates any living politician. Bombs did not create those wounds, and bombs will not heal them. Now I want to show you that this is not just a Congo problem, because the same question, will bombs and drones mend hearts, is being asked right now in Iran. And the answer there will shape the next 30 years, just as the answer in the DRC has shaped the last 30. The question that is now being asked about Iran is now, when does the bombing stop? The question is, why are these two countries at odds with each other? Has that question been addressed? Will bombs address it, or will they deepen it? The hostility between the United States and Iran did not begin in February 2026. It has been building for decades. Through the 1953 coup that the CIA helped orchestrate, which overthrew Iran's democratically elected prime minister. Through the 1979 hostage crisis, through decades of sanctions, proxy conflicts, and mutual distrust that accumulated like wounds on top of wounds. The bombs did not create a new conflict. They struck a wound that was already there. And wounds do not heal by being struck again. I want to ask you about Richard Nixon. Before Nixon, the relationship between the United States and China was cold, hostile. The two countries had not had direct diplomatic relations for more than 2 decades. China was seen as an ideological enemy. The differences between the two countries were real and deep and unresolved. Nixon did something that surprised the world. He approached China, not because China had changed, not because the ideological differences had been resolved, not because every grievance had been addressed. He approached China because he understood something the hawks in his administration did not want to accept. The coldness itself was making everything worse. And a gesture, a real gesture, could change the temperature of the relationship without requiring every underlying dispute to be resolved first. Did that gesture resolve all differences between the United States and China? No. Some of those differences exist to this day, but it removed the condition that was making resolution impossible. It created a space, a temperature in which dialogue could eventually happen. I am not saying Iran is China. I am not saying the situations are identical. I am not saying the Iranian government's actions were justified. I am asking a different question. Was the Nixon-style approach to Iran ever seriously tried? Was there a moment before the bombs where a real gesture could have changed the temperature? And if that approach was available, why was it not chosen? Because here is what I know from watching the DRC for 30 years. If you bomb my community and tell me you want peace, what you're offering me is not peace. You are offering me silence. You are telling me to stop expressing the wound, not to heal it. If bombs killed my entire family and you want to help me forget my wound by bombing me again, what kind of healings does that bring? That is not peace. That is something else entirely. I want to be precise about what I am and I am not arguing. I am not arguing that military force is never justified. I am not arguing that Iran was not a threat. I am not making a partisan argument about this administration versus any other. I am making a constitutional argument, and it is simple. Article 1, Section 8. The power to declare war belongs to Congress, not one person's assessment of the threat, not to one person's reading of history, not to one person's judgment about when the time for diplomacy has passed. To Congress, to 535 people who each answer to a specific district, a specific state, specific constituents who will feel every consequence of that decision in their own lives and in their own families. Here's why that matters in this specific conversation. The decision to go to war is also a decision about what kind of peace you are building toward. It is a decision about whether you are trying to address the root cause or suppress the symptoms. It is a decision about whether you are offering a Nixon gesture or a bombing campaign. It is a decision about whether the communities on the receiving end will have any reason to choose dialogue, or whether they will spend the next 30 years accumulating new wounds on top of the old ones. One person cannot weigh all that. One person, however intelligent, however certain, however well-intentioned, cannot represent the full cost of that decision. That is why the founders gave the power to Congress, not because Congress is always wise, not because 535 people always make better decisions than one, but because 535 people who answer to specific communities have to live with the consequences in a way that one person in the White House never does. The families watching gas prices climb, they answer to a congressman. The military families receiving flag-draped coffins, they answer to a senator. The communities in Eastern Congo wondering whether agreement number 18 will hold, they watch what America does and draw conclusions about what America power means. The community in Iran living under bombs, they will remember what was done and who did it for a generation. The way the communities in Eastern Congo remember every broken agreement, the way I remember the truck and the silence the next day at school. None of them were asked. Trump calls himself the president of peace. I grew up in a country that had 17 peace agreements. I watched a classmate get taken from my school. I watched school go on the next day as if nothing had happened. I know what silence that is managed instead of resolved looks like. I know what the community looks like 30 years later when the wounds were never addressed. The president is not offering peace. He's offering silence. And silence imposed by force in the DRC, in Iran, anywhere is not the end of the conflict. It is the condition that makes the next one inevitable. Will bombs and drones mend hearts? The Constitution gave Congress the power to declare war because the founders understood that peace, real peace, cannot belong to one person. It has to be owned, accountably, by the people who answer to the communities that will live inside its consequences. That requirement has not been met. I have watched this pattern in 2 countries on 2 continents. This is the third voice. Constitutional analysis in plain English. Same standard, regardless of party. Always.